Chapter 13. Manon. That one word, my dear Watson, should have told me the whole story, had I been the ideal reasoner, which you are so fond of depicting. Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. "Thank God," said Parker. "Well, that settles it." "It does, and yet again it doesn't," retorted Lord Peter. He leaned back against the fat silk cushions in the sofa corner, meditatively. "Well, of course it's disagreeable having to give this woman away, but these things have to be done. Oh, I know, it's all simply awfully nice and all that, and Jerry, who's got the poor woman into this mess, has to be considered first, I know. And if we don't restrain Grimethorpe quite successfully, and he cuts her throat for her, well, it'll be simply ripping for Jerry to think of all his life. Oh, Jerry! You know, we're frightful idiots not to have seen the truth right off. I mean, my sister-in-law, of course, is an awfully good woman and all that, but Mrs. Grimethorpe, oh, I told you about the time she mistook me for Jerry. One crowded split second of glorious all-overishness. I ought to have known then, of course. Now I don't believe there's an ounce of feeling left in the woman except sheer terror. Ah, but what eyes, what skin he got. Don't mind. Some undeserving fellows have all the luck. Now, have you got any really good stories? No? Well, I shall tell you some. Do you know the rhyme about the young man at the War Office? Parker endured 5 such stories with commendable patience, and then suddenly broke down. "Hooray! Splendid, man! I love to see you melt into a refined snigger from time to time. I'll spare you the really outrageous one about the young housewife and the traveller in bicycle pumps. You know, Charles, I really should like to know who did Cathcart in. Legally, it's enough to prove Jerry innocent, I know, but Mrs. Grimethorpe or no Mrs. Grimethorpe, it doesn't do us credit in a professional capacity. The father weakens, but the governor is fixed. If Jerry sticks to his denial, the most they can be sure of is that either he or Mrs. Grimethorpe is being chivalrous. But you've got the letter." "But how are we going to prove that it came that evening? The envelope is destroyed. Fleming remembers nothing about it. Jerry might have received it days earlier. Or it might be a complete fake. Who's to say I didn't put it in the window myself and pretend to find it? After all, I am not what you would call a disinterested party." "Bunter saw you find it." "No, he didn't, Charles. At that precise moment he was out of the room fetching shaving water. Moreover, only Mrs. Grimethorpe can swear to what the really important point of the letter is, and clarify the moment of Jerry's arrival and departure. Unless he was at Grider's Hole before 12:30 at least, it is immaterial whether he was there or not. Can't we keep Mrs. Grimethorpe up our sleeves, so to speak? That sounds a bit abandoned. But we will keep her with pleasure, if you like. And meanwhile, we do our best to find the actual criminal. Oh, yes. Which reminds me, I made a discovery at the lodge. At least I think I did. Did you notice someone had been forcing one of the study windows? No, really? Yes, I found distinct marks. Of course, it was a long time after the murder, but there were scratches on the catch, and, well, it's the sort of thing a penknife would leave. Anyhow, I asked Fleming about it, and he said he did remember, now he came to think of it, that on the Thursday morning he found the window open, and he couldn't account for it. Mr. Parker sat down, suspicious and in silence. He sipped his port, and saw unimaginable visions warmly glowing in its rosy depths. Wimsey pulled out his pocket-book and began idly turning over its contents, throwing old letters into the fire, unfolding and refolding memoranda, and reviewing a miscellaneous series of other people's visiting cards. He came at length to the slip of blotting paper from the study of Whittlesdale, to whose fragmentary markings he had given scarcely a thought. Presently Mr. Parker, finishing his port and recalling his mind with an effort, remembered that he'd been meaning to tell Peter something before the name of Lady Mary had driven all other thoughts from his head. He turned to his host, open-mouthed for speech, but his remark never got beyond a preliminary click like that of a clock about to strike, for, even as he turned, Lord Peter brought his fist down on the table with a bang that made the decanters ring, and cried out in the loud voice of complete and sudden enlightenment, "Boil my brains! boil 'em, mash 'em, and serve 'em up with butter as a dish of turnips. It's damn well all they're good for. Look at me. Here we've been worrying over Jerry and worrying over Mary and hunting for Goyles and Grimthorpeses and God knows what. All the time I've got this little bit of paper tucked away in my pocket. The blot upon the paper's rim, and a blotted paper was to him and nothing more. But man on! Oh, Charles, if I'd the grey matter of a woodlouse, that book ought to have told me the whole story. And think what we'd have been saved. I wish you wouldn't be so excited. I'm sure it's perfectly splendid for you to see your way clearly. But I've never read Manon What's-it, and you haven't shown me the blotting paper, and so I've not got the foggiest idea what you've discovered. Here. I observe that the paper is rather crumpled and dirty. It smells powerfully of tobacco and Russian leather. And I deduce that you've been keeping it in your pocket-book. No! And when you actually saw me take it out. Holmes, how do you do it? At one corner I see two blots, one rather larger than the other. I think someone must have shaken a pen there. Is there anything sinister about the blot? I haven't noticed anything. Some way below the blots, the Duke has signed his name, or rather his title. The inference is his letters were not to intimates. That inference is justifiable, I fancy. Colonel Marchbanks has a neat signature. Then he can hardly mean mischief. He signs his name like an honest man. Proceed. There's a scrawly message about 5 something, or fine something. Do you see anything occult there? The number 5 may have a cabalistic meaning, but I admit I do not know what it is. There are 5 senses, 5 fingers, 5 great Chinese precepts, 5 books of Moses, to say nothing of the mysterious entities hymned in the dilly song 5. Well, then that's all there is to be deduced, except that it is a fragment consisting of OE on one line and FOU below it. And what do you make of that? Is found, I suppose? Do you? Well, that seems the simplest interpretation. Or possibly his foul. There seems to have been a sudden rush of ink to the pen just there. Do you think it is his foul? Was the Duke writing about Cathcart's foul play? Is that what you mean? No, I don't make that of it. Besides, I don't think it's Jerry's writing. Well, whose is it? I don't know, but I can guess. And it leads us somewhere. It tells us the whole story. Oh, cough it up, Whimsy. Even Dr. Watson would lose patience by now. Oh, tut. Try the line above. Well, there's only OE. Yes. Well, I don't know. Poet, poem, manoeuvre, citron. It might be anything. I don't know about that. There aren't lashings of English words with OE in them. And it's written so close it almost looks like a diphthong. You mean it isn't an English word? Perhaps it isn't. Well, French. You're getting warm. Oh, secure. Hold on a moment. Look at the scratch in front of that. C-E-R? Perseras. It seems to need another letter or two, though. So, the is found line. F-O-U, foo. Who? Not who, foo. And I said who. Who? Who's foo? Oh, je suis fou. And I suggest the next words are dédouanière, or something like that. They might be. Cautious beast, I say they are. All right. Suppose they are. It tells us everything. It tells us nothing. Everything, I say. Think, this was written on the day Cathcart died. Now, who in the house would be likely to write these words? Take everybody. I know it isn't Jerry's fist, and he wouldn't be one to use those expressions. Colonel or Mrs. Marchbanks? No, not Pygmalion likely. Freddy? Couldn't write passionate letters in French to save his life. Oh, no, of course not. It could be another Cathcart or Lady Mary? Rot! It couldn't be Mary. Why not? Not unless she changed her sex, you see. Oh, right. No, of course not. It would have to be, yes. Well, Cathcart. Must be Cathcart. Of course. He lived in France all his life. Consider his bank book. Consider. Whimsy, we've been blind! Yes! And listen, I was going to tell you. The Sûreté write me that they've traced one of Cathcart's banknotes. Where to? To a Mr. Francois, who owns a lot of house property and lets it out in apartments? No doubt. Well, when's the next train? Bunter? My lord? Mr. Bunter hurried to the door at the call. The next boat train for Paris. 8:20, my lord, from Waterloo. We're going by it? How long? 20 minutes, my lord. Then pack my toothbrush and call a taxi. Certainly, my lord. But, Whimsy, what light does it throw on Cathcart's murder? Did this woman... I've no time. But I will be back in a day or two. Meanwhile, he hunted about hastily on the bookshelf. Read this. He flung the book at his friend and plunged into the bedroom. At 11 o'clock, as a gap of dirty water, disfigured with oil and bits of paper, widened between the Normania and the quay, while hardened passengers fortified their sea stomachs with cold ham and pickles, and the more nervous studied the body jackets in their cabins, while the harbour lights winked and swam right and left, and Lord Peter scraped acquaintance with a second-rate cinema actor in the bar. Charles Parker sat, with a puzzled frown, before the fire at 110A Piccadilly, making his first acquaintance with the delicate masterpiece of the Abbé Prévost. Chapter 14. The Edge of the Axe Towards Him. The schemes of the defence were kept dark indeed, the more so that they found themselves on the eve of the struggle, deprived of their principal witness, and wholly ignorant whether or not he would be forthcoming with his testimony. Lord Peter had returned from Paris at the end of 4 days, and had burst in like a cyclone at Great Ormond Street. "I've got it, but it's touch and go. Listen." For an hour Parker had listened, feverishly taking notes. "You can work on that," said Whimsy. "Tell Murbles I'm off." His next appearance was at the American Embassy. The ambassador, however, was not there, having received a royal mandate to dine. Whimsy damned the dinner, abandoned the polite horn-rimmed secretaries, and leapt back into his taxi with a demand to be driven to Buckingham Palace. Here a great deal of insistence with scandalized officials produced first a higher official, then a very high official, and finally the American ambassador, and a royal personage, while the meat was yet in their mouths. Yes," said the ambassador. "Of course, it can be done." "Surely," said the personage genially. "We mustn't have any delay. Might cause an international misunderstanding, and a lot of paragraphs about Ellis Island. Terrible nuisance to have to adjourn the trial. Dreadful fuss always, isn't it? Our secretaries are everlastingly bringing things along to our place to sign. Extra policemen wanted. Seating. Good luck to you, Whimsy. Oh, come and have something while we get your papers through. When does your boat go?" "Tomorrow morning, sir. I'm catching the Liverpool train in an hour, if I can." "You surely will," said the ambassador, cordially signing a note. "And they say the English can't hustle." So, with his papers all in order, his lordship set sail from Liverpool the next morning, leaving his legal representatives to draw up alternative schemes of defence. Then the peers, 2 by 2, in their order, beginning with the youngest baron, Garter, King of Arms, very hot and bothered, fussing unhappily around the 300 or so British peers who were sheepishly shrugging into their robes, while the heralds did their best to line up the assembly and keep them from wandering away when once arranged. "Of all the farces," grumbled Lord Atterbury irritably. He was a very short, stout gentleman of a choleric countenance, and was annoyed to find himself next to the Earl of Strathgillan and Begg, an extremely tall, lean nobleman who pronounced views on prohibition and the legitimation question. "I say, Atterbury," said a kindly brick-red peer, with 5 rows of ermine on his shoulder, "is it true Whimsy hasn't come back? My daughter tells me she heard he'd gone to collect evidence in the States. Why the States?" "Don't know, but Whimsy's a dashed clever fellow. When he found those emeralds of mine, you know, I said—" Your Grace, cried Rouge Dragon, desperately diving in. "Your Grace is out of line again." "Oh, what? Oh, damn!" Must obey orders, I suppose. What? He was towed away from the mere earls and pushed into position next to the Duke of Wiltshire, who was deaf and a distant connection of Denver's on the distaff side. The royal gallery was packed. In the seats reserved below the bar for peeresses sat the Dowager Duchess of Denver, beautifully dressed and defiant. She suffered much from the adjacent presence of her daughter-in-law, whose misfortune it was to become disagreeable when she was unhappy. Perhaps the heaviest curse that can be laid on a man who is born to sorrow. Behind the imposing array of counsel in full-bottomed wigs in the body of the hall were seats reserved for witnesses, and here Mr. Bunter was accommodated, to be called if the defence should find it necessary to establish the alibi, the majority of the witnesses being pent up in the King's robing-room, gnawing their fingers and glaring at one another. On either side, above the bar, were the benches for the peers, each in his own right a judge both of fact and law, while on the high dais the great chair of state stood ready for the Lord High Steward. The reporters at their little table were beginning to fidget and look at their watches. Muffled by the walls of the talk, Big Ben dropped 11 slow notes into the suspense. A door opened. The reporters started, rose to their feet. Counsel rose. Everybody rose. The Dowager Duchess whispered irrepressibly to her neighbour that it reminded her of the voice that breathed o'er Eden, and the procession streamed slowly in, lit by a shaft of wintry sunshine from the tall windows. The proceedings were opened by a proclamation of silence from the Sergeant-at-Arms, after which the Clerk of the Court in Chancery, kneeling at the foot of the throne, presented the commission under the Great Seal to the Lord High Steward. The Lord Chancellor held the appointment on this occasion, as usual, and he, finding no use for it, returned it with great solemnity to the Clerk of the Crown. The latter accordingly proceeded to read it, at dismal and wearisome length, affording the assembly an opportunity of judging just how bad the acoustics of the chamber were. The Sergeant-at-Arms retorted with great emphasis, "God save the King!" Whereupon Garter King of Arms and the Gentleman Usher of the Black Rod, kneeling again, handed the Lord High Steward his staff of office. "It's so picturesque, isn't it? Quite high church, you know." The certiorari and return followed in a long, sonorous rigmarole, which, starting with George V, by the grace of God, called upon all the justices and judges of the Old Bailey, enumerated the Lord Mayor of London, the Recorder, and a quantity of assorted aldermen and justices, skipped back to our Lord the King, roamed about the city of London, counties of London and Middlesex, Essex, Kent, and Surrey, mentioned our late sovereign, Lord King William IV, branched off to the Local Government Act 1888, lost its way in a list of all treasons, murders, felonies, and misdemeanours, by whomsoever and in what manner soever done, committed or perpetrated, and by whom or to whom, when, how, and after what, and all other and articles and circumstances concerning the premises, and every one of them, and any of them, in any manner whatsoever. And at last, triumphantly, after reciting the names of the whole grand jury, came to the presentation of the indictment, with a sudden, brutal brevity. "The jurors for our Lord the King, upon their oaths, present that the most noble and puissant Prince, Gerald Christian Wimsey, Viscount St. George, Duke of Denver, a peer of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, on the 13th day of October in the year of our Lord 1923, in the parish of Riddlesdale, in the county of Yorkshire, did kill and murder Dennis Cathcart." After which proclamation, for report of the procedure see House of Lords Journal for dates in question, was made by the Sergeant-at-Arms for the Gentleman Usher of the Black Rod to call in Gerald Christian Wimsey, Viscount St. George, Duke of Denver, to appear at the bar to answer his indictment, who, being come to the bar, kneeled until the Lord High Steward acquainted him that he might rise. The Duke of Denver looked very small and pink and lonely in his blue serge suit, the only head uncovered among all his peers. But he was not without a certain dignity, as he was conducted to the stool place within the bar, which is deemed appropriate to noble prisoners, and he listened to the Lord High Steward's rehearsal of the charge with a simple gravity, which became him very well. Then the said Duke of Denver was arraigned by the Clerk of Parliaments in the usual manner, and asked whether he was guilty or not guilty, to which he pleaded not guilty. Whereupon Sir Wigmore Inching, the Attorney-General, rose to open the case for the Crown. After the usual preliminaries to the effect that the case was a very painful one, and the occasion a very solemn one, Sir Wigmore proceeded to unfold the story from the beginning. The quarrel, the shot at 3 a.m., the pistol, the finding of the body, the disappearance of the letter, and the rest of the familiar tale. He hinted, moreover, that evidence would be called to show that the quarrel between Denver and Cathcart had motives other than those alleged by the prisoner, and that the latter would turn out to have good reason to fear exposure at Cathcart's hands. At which point the accused was observed to glance uneasily at his solicitor. The exposition took only a short time, and Sir Wigmore proceeded to call witnesses. The prosecution being unable to call the Duke of Denver, the first important witness was Lady Mary Wimsey. After telling about her relations of the murdered man and describing the quarrel, "At 3 o'clock, she proceeded, I got up and went downstairs."
"In consequence of what did you do so?"
inquired Sir Wigmore, looking around the court with the air of a man about to produce a great effect. "In consequence of an appointment I had made to meet a friend." All the reporters looked up suddenly, like dogs expecting a piece of biscuit, and Sir Wigmore started so violently that he knocked his own brief upon the head.
"Indeed? Now, witness, remember you are on oath, and be very careful. What was it caused you to wake at 3 o'clock?
"I was not asleep. I was waiting for my appointment."
"And while you were waiting, did you hear anything?"
"Nothing at all."
"Now, Lady Mary, I have here your disposition sworn before the coroner. I will read it to you. Please listen very carefully. You say at 3 o'clock I was wakened by a shot. I thought it might be poachers. It sounded very loud, close to the house. I went down to find out what it was. Do you remember making that statement?"
"Yes, but it was not true."
"Not true?"
"No."
"In the face of that statement, you still say that you heard nothing at 3 o'clock?"
"I heard nothing at all. I went down because I had an appointment."
"My lords, I must ask leave to treat this witness as a hostile witness."
Sir Wigmore's fierce onslaught, however, produced no effect except a reiteration of the statement that no shot had been heard at any time. With regard to the finding of the body, Lady Mary explained that when she said, "Oh God, Gerald, you've killed him," she was under the impression that the body was that of the friend who had made the appointment. Here a fierce wrangle ensued as to whether the story of the appointment was relevant. The Lords decided that on the whole it was relevant, and the entire Goyles story came out, together with the intimation that Mr. Goyles was in court and could be produced. Eventually, with a loud snort, Sir Wigmore Inching gave up his witness to Sir Impey Biggs, who, rising suavely and looking extremely handsome, brought back the discussion to a point long previous.
"Forgive the nature of the question, but will you tell us whether, in your opinion, the late Captain Cathcart was deeply in love with you?"
"No, I am sure he was not. It was an arrangement for our mutual convenience."
From your knowledge of his character, do you suppose he was capable of very deep affection?"
"I think he might have been, for the right woman. I should say he had a very passionate nature."
"Thank you. You've told us that you met Captain Cathcart several times while you were staying in Paris last February. Do you remember going with him to a jeweller's at the Rue de la Paix?"
"I may have done. I cannot exactly remember."
"The date to which I should like to draw your attention is the 6th.
"I could not say."
"Do you recognize this trinket?"
Here the green-eyed cat was handed to the witness. "No, I have never seen it before."
"Did Captain Cathcart ever give one like it to you?"
"Never."
"Did you ever possess Such a jewel.
No, I'm quite positive I never did.
My lords, I put in this diamond and platinum cat. Thank you, Lady Mary.
James Fleming, being questioned closely as to the delivery of the post, continued to be vague and forgetful, leaving the court, on the whole, with the impression that no letter had ever been delivered to the Duke. Sir Wigmore, whose opening speech contained sinister allusions to an attempt to blacken the character of the victim, smiled disagreeably and handed the witness over to Sir Impey. The latter contented himself with extracting an admission that witnesses could not swear positively one way or the other, and passed on immediately to another point.
Do you recollect whether any letters came by the same post for any other members of the party? Yes, I took 3 or 4 to the billiard-room. Can you say to whom they were addressed? There were several for Colonel Marchbanks, and one for Captain Cathcart. Did Captain Cathcart open his letter there and then? I couldn't say, sir. I left the room and immediately went to take his Grace's letters to the study. Now, will you tell us how the letters are collected for the post in the morning at the lodge? They are put in the post-bag, which is locked. His Grace keeps one key, and the post-office has the other. The letters are put in through a slit in the top. On the morning after Captain Cathcart's death, were the letters taken to the post as usual? Yes, sir. By whom? I took the bag down myself, sir. Had you the opportunity of seeing what letters were in it? I saw there were 2 or 3 when the postmistress took them out of the bag, but I couldn't say who they were addressed to or anything like that. Thank you. Sir Wigmore Lynching here bounced up like a very irritable jack-in-the-box. Is this the first time you have mentioned this letter which you delivered to Captain Cathcart on the night of the murder? My lords, cried Sir Impey, I protest against this language. We have as yet had no proof that any murder has taken place. This was the first indication of a line of defence which Sir Impey proposed to take, and caused a little rustle of excitement. My lords, I submit that so far there has been no attempt to prove murder, and until the prosecution have established murder, such a word cannot properly be put into the mouth of a witness. Perhaps, Sir Wigmore, it would be better to use another word. It makes no difference to our case, my lord. I bow to your lordship's decision. Heaven knows that I would not seek even by the lightest or most trivial word to hamper so serious a charge. My lords, if the learned Attorney-General considers the word murder to be a triviality, it would be interesting to know what words to which he does attach importance. The learned Attorney-General has agreed to substitute another word. Let us substitute it and proceed. Sir Impey, having achieved his purpose of robbing the Attorney-General's onslaught on the witness of some of its original impetus, sat down, and Sir Wigmore repeated his question. I mentioned it first to Mr. Murbles about 3 weeks ago. Mr. Murbles is the solicitor of the accused, I believe. Yes, sir. And how was it? Sir Wigmore settled his pince-nez on his rather prominent nose and glowered at the witness. That you did not mention this letter at the inquest or at the earlier proceedings in the case? I wasn't asked, sir. What made you suddenly decide to go and tell Mr. Murbles about it? He asked me, sir. No, he asked you. And you conveniently remembered it when it was suggested to you. No, sir, I remembered it all the time. That is to say, I hadn't given any special thought to it, though, sir. Oh, you remembered it all the time, though you hadn't given any thought to it. Now I put it to you that you had not remembered about it at all, till it was suggested to you by Mr. Murbles. Mr. Murbles didn't suggest anything, sir. He asked me whether any other letters came by post, and then I remembered it. Exactly. When it was suggested to you, you remembered it, and not before. No, sir. That is, if I'd been asked before, I should have remembered it and mentioned it, but not being asked, I didn't think it would be of any importance, sir. You didn't think it would be of any importance that this man received a letter a few hours before his decease. No, sir. I reckoned if it had been of any importance, the police would have asked about it, sir. Now, James Fleming, I put it to you again, but it never occurred to you that Captain Cathcart might have received a letter the night he died, until the idea was put into your head by the defence. Is that not the case? The witness, baffled by this interrogative negative, made a confused reply, and Sir Wigmore, glancing round the house as much as to say, "You see this shifty fellow," proceeded, "I suppose it didn't occur to you either to mention to the police about the letters in the post-bag?" "No, sir." "Why not?" "I didn't think it my place, sir." "Did you think about it at all?" "No, sir." "Do you ever think?" "No, sir. I mean, yes, sir." "Then will you please think what you are saying now?" "Yes, sir." "You say that you took all these important letters out of the house without authority and without acquainting the police?" I had my orders, sir." "From whom?" "His Grace." "His Grace. His Grace's orders. And when did you get that order?" "Part of my regular duty, sir, to take the bag to the post each morning." "Did it not occur to you that in a case like this the proper information of the police might be more important than your orders?" "No, sir." "Ha!" Sir Wigmore sat down with a disgusted look, and Sir Impey took the witness in hand again. "Did the thought of this letter delivered to Captain Cathcart never pass through your mind between the day of the death and the day when Mr. Murble spoke to you about it?" "It passed through my mind, in a manner of speaking, sir." "When was that?" "Before the grand jury, sir." "And how was it you didn't speak about it then?" "Oh, the gentleman said I was to confine myself to the questions, and not say anything on my own, sir." "Oh, who was this very peremptory gentleman?" "The lawyer that came down to ask questions for the Crown, sir." "Thank you." Sir Impey sat down, leaned over to say something, apparently of an amusing nature, to Mr. Glibbery. The question of the letter was further pursued in the examination of the Honourable Freddy. Sir Wigmore Wrinching laid great stress upon this witness's assertion that the deceased had been in excellent health and spirits when retiring to bed on the Wednesday evening, and had spoken of his approaching marriage. "He seemed perfect cheerio, you know." "Particularly what?" inquired the Lord High Steward. "Cheerio, my lord," said Sir Wigmore with a deprecatory bow. "I do not know whether that is a dictionary word." His lordship entered it into his notes with meticulous exactness. "But I take it to be synonymous with cheerful." The Honourable Freddy, appealed to, said he thought he meant more than just cheerful, more merry and bright, you know. "May we take it that he was in exceptionally lively spirits?" "Oh, yes, take it in any spirit you like." "The deceased was particularly lively and merry when he went to bed, and looking forward to his marriage in the near future. Would that be a fair statement of his condition?" The Honourable Freddy agreed. Sir Impey did not cross-examine, but went straight to the point. "Do you recollect anything about the letters that were brought in on the night of the death?" "Yes, I had one for my aunt. The Colonel had some, I fancy, and there was one for Cathcart." "Did Captain Cathcart read his letter there and then?" No, I'm sure he didn't. You see, I opened mine, and I saw he was shoving his away in his pocket. And I thought, never mind what you thought. What did you do?" "I said, 'Excuse me, you don't mind, you?' And he said, 'Not at all.' But he didn't read his. And I remember thinking, 'We can't have that, you know,' said the Lord High Steward. "But that's why I'm so sure he didn't open it," said the Honourable Freddy, hurt. "You see, I said to myself at the time, what a secretive fellow he was. And that's how I know." Sir Wigmore, who had bounced up with his mouth open, sat down again. "Thank you, Mr. Arbuthnot," said Sir Impey. Colonel and Mrs. Marchbanks testified to having heard movements in the Duke's study at 11:30. They had heard no shot or other noise. There was no cross-examination. Mr. Pettigrew Robinson gave a vivid account of the quarrel, and asserted very positively that there could be no mistaking the sound of the Duke's bedroom door. We were then called up by Mr. Arbuthnot at a little after 3 a.m. and went down to the conservatory, where I saw the accused and Mr. Arbuthnot washing the face of the deceased.
I pointed out to them what an unwise thing it was to do this, as they might be destroying valuable evidence for police. They paid no attention to me. There were a number of footmarks around the door which I wanted to examine, because it was my theory that—"
"My lords," cried Sir Impey, "we really cannot have this witness's theory."
"Certainly not. Answer the questions, please, and do not add anything on your own account. Of course, I don't mean to imply that there was anything wrong about it, but I considered—" "Never mind what you considered. Attend, please. Sir Impey, when you saw the body, how was it lying?" "On its back, with Denver and Arbuthnot washing its face. It had evidently been turned over, because— Sir Wigmore, you really must control your witness. Kindly confine yourself to the evidence. We do not want your deductions from it. You say that when you saw the body, it was lying on its back. Is that correct? And Denver and Arbuthnot were washing it?" "Yes." "Now, I want to pass to another point. Do you remember an occasion when you lunched at the Royal Automobile Club?" "I do. I lunched there one day in the middle of last August. I think it was about the 16th or 17th. "Will you tell us what happened on this occasion?" "Well, I'd gone into the smoke-room after lunch. I was reading in a high-backed armchair when I saw, the prisoner at the bar come in with the late Captain Cathcart. That is to say, I saw them in the big mirror over the mantelpiece, and they did not notice that there was anyone there, or they'd have been a little more careful what they said, I fancy. They sat down near me and started talking. Presently Cathcart leaned over and said something in a low tone which I couldn't catch. The prisoner leapt up with a horrified face, exclaiming, 'For God's sake, don't give me away, Cathcart. There'd be the devil to pay.' Cathcart said something reassuring, I didn't hear what. He had a furtive sort of voice, and the prisoner replied, 'Well, don't, that's all. I couldn't afford to let anybody get hold of it.' The prisoner seemed greatly alarmed. Captain Cathcart was laughing. They dropped their voices again, and that was all I heard." "Thank you." Sir Impey took over the witness.
"You are gifted with very excellent powers of observation and deduction, Mr. Pettigrew Robinson. No doubt you like to exercise your sympathetic imagination in a scrutiny of people's motives and characters."
"I think I may call myself a student of human nature."
"Doubtless people are inclined to confide in you."
"Well, yes, certainly. I might say I am a great repository of human documents."
"On the night of Captain Cathcart's death, your wide knowledge of the world was doubtless of great comfort and assistance to the family. They did not avail themselves of the experience, sir. I was completely ignored. If only my advice had been taken at the time."
Thank you. Yes. If Captain Cathcart had had any secret or trouble of any kind in his life, you would have expected him to tell you about it. From any right-minded young man, I might certainly have expected it. But Captain Cathcart was disagreeably secretive. On the only occasion when I showed a friendly interest in his affairs, he was very rude indeed. He called me— "That will do," interposed Sir Wigmore hastily, the answer to the question not having turned out as he expected. "What the deceased called you is immaterial." Mr. Pettigrew Robinson retired, leaving behind him the impression of a man with a grudge, an impression which seemed to please Mr. Glibbery and Mr. Brownrigg Fortescue extremely, for they chuckled continuously for the evidence of the next two witnesses. Mrs. Pettigrew Robinson had little to add to her previous evidence of the inquest. Miss Cathcart was asked by Sir Impey about Cathcart's parentage, and explained with deep disapproval in her voice that her brother, when an all too experienced and middle-aged man of the world, had nevertheless been entangled by an Italian singer of 19, who had connived to make him marry her. She explained how Dennis had always chafed at her influence, and gone about with men she disapproved of, and eventually gone to Paris to make a diplomatic career for himself, since which time she had hardly seen him. An interesting point was raised in cross-examination of Inspector Craigs. A penknife being shown him, he identified it as one found on the Cathcart's body. By Mr. Glibbery.
"Do you observe any marks on the blade?"
"Yes, there's a slight notch near the handle."
"Might the mark have been caused by forcing back the catch of a window?"
Yes, it might, though I doubt whether so small a knife would be adequate for such a purpose."
The revolver was produced, and the question of ownership raised. "But, my lords, we do not dispute the Duke's ownership of the revolver." The court looked surprised, and after Harddraw, the gamekeeper, had given evidence of a shot heard at 11:30, the medical evidence was taken. Could the wound have been self-inflicted? It could, certainly. Would it have been instantly fatal? No, from the amount of blood found upon the path, it was obviously not instant. Not immediately fatal. No. Are the marks found, in your opinion, consistent with deceased having crawled towards the house? Yes, quite. He might have had sufficient strength to do it. Would such a wound cause fever? Well, it's quite possible. He might have lost consciousness for some time, and contracted a chill and fever by lying in the wet. Are the appearances consistent with his having lived for some hours after being wounded? They strongly suggest it. Re-examining, Sir Wigmore established that the wound and general appearance of the ground were equally consistent with the theory that deceased had been shot by another hand at very close quarters, and dragged to the house before life was extinct. In your experience, is it more usual for a person committing suicide to shoot himself in the chest or in the head? In the head is perhaps more usual, so much as almost to create a presumption of murder when the wound is in the chest. I would not go as far as that. But other things being equal, you would say that a wound in the head is more suggestive of suicide than a body wound. Well, yes, that's so. But suicide by shooting in the heart is not by any means impossible. Oh dear, no. There have been such cases. Oh yes, many such. There's nothing in the medical evidence before you to exclude the idea of suicide. Nothing whatever. This closed the case for the Crown.
Chapter 15. Bar Falling. When Sir Impey Biggs rose to make his opening speech for the defence on the second day, it was observed that he looked somewhat worried, a thing very unusual in him. His remarks were very brief, yet in those few words he sent a thrill through the great assembly. "My lords, in rising to open this defence, I find myself in a more than unusually anxious position. Not that I have any doubt of your lordship's verdict. Never perhaps has it been possible so clearly to prove the innocence of any accused person as in the case of my noble client. But I will explain to your lordships at once that I may be obliged to ask for an adjournment, since we are at present without an important witness and a decisive piece of evidence. My lords, I hold here in my hand a cablegram from this witness, and I will tell you his name. It is Lord Peter Wimsey, the brother of the accused. It was handed in yesterday at New York, and I will read it to you. It says, Evidence secured, leaving tonight with Air Pilot Grant. Sworn copy and dispositions follow by SS Lucania in case of accident. Hope arrive Thursday. My lords, at this moment this is an all-important witness who is cleaving the air above us over the wide Atlantic. In this wintry weather, he is braving a peril which would appall any heart but his own, and that of a world-famous aviator whose help he has enlisted, so that no moment may be lost in freeing his noble brother from this terrible charge, my lords. The barometer is falling. An immense hush, like the stillness of a black frost that has fallen over the glittering benches. The lords in their scarlet and ermine, the peeresses in their rich furs, council in their full-bottomed wigs and billowing gowns, the Lord High Steward upon his high seat, the ushers and the heralds and the gaudy King of Arms, all rested rigid in their places. Only the prisoner looked across at his council and back to the Lord High Steward in a kind of bewilderment, and the reporters scribbled wildly and desperately. Stop press, announcements, lurid headlines, picturesque epithets, and alarming weather predictions, to halt hurrying London on its way.
Pierce Sun flies Atlantic. Brothers' devotion. Will Wimsey be in time? Hiddlesdale murder charge. Amazing development.
This was news. A million tape machines ticked it in and out of offices and clubs, where clerks and messengers gloated over it and laid wagers on the result. For thousands of monster printing presses sucked it in and boiled it into lead, champed it into slugs, engulfed it into their huge maws, digested it onto paper, and flapped it forth again with clutching talons, and a blue-nosed, ragged veteran who had once assisted to dig Major Whimsy out of a shell-hole near Cawdry muttered, "God help him, he's a real decent little blighter," as he tucked his newspapers into the iron grill of a tree in Kingsway and displayed his placard to the best advantage. After a brief statement that he intended not merely to prove his noble client's innocence, but, as a work of subrogation, to make clear every detail of the tragedy, Sir Impey Biggs proceeded, without further delay, to call his witnesses. Among the first was Mr. Goyles, who testified that he had found Cathcart already dead at 3 a.m., with his head close to the water trough, which stood near the well. Ellen, the maidservant, next confirmed James Fleming's evidence with regard to the postbag, and explained how she changed the blotting paper in the study every day. The evidence of Detective Inspector Parker aroused more interest and some bewilderment. His description of the discovery of the green-eyed cat was particularly listened to. He also gave a minute account of the footprints and mark-draggings, especially the imprint of a hand in the flower-bed. The piece of blotting paper was then produced, and photographs of it circulated among the peers. A long discussion ensued on both these points, Sir Impey Biggs endeavouring to show that the imprint on the flower-bed was such as would have been caused by a man endeavouring to lift himself from a prone position. Sir Wigmore Inching, doing his best to force an admission that it might have been made by a deceased trying to prevent himself from being dragged along, said the position of the fingers being towards the house appears, does it not, to negative the suggestion of dragging. Doing his best to force an admission that it might have been made by the deceased trying to prevent himself from being dragged along. Sir Wigmore, however, put it to the witness that the wounded man might have been dragged head foremost. "If now I were to drag you by the coat collar, then my lords will grasp my contention." "It appears," observed the Lord High Steward, "to be a case for solvitur ambulando." Laughter. "I suggest that when the house rises for lunch, some of us should make the experiment, choosing a member of similar height and weight to the deceased." All the noble lords looked round at one another to see which unfortunate one might be chosen for the experiment. Inspector Parker then mentioned the marks of forcing on the study window. "In your opinion, could the cat have been forced back by the knife found on the body of the deceased?" "Well, I know it could. I made the experiment myself, with a knife of exactly similar pattern." After this, the message on the blotting paper was read backwards and forwards and interpreted in every possible way, the defence insisting the language was French, and the words "Je suis faute de l'heure," the prosecution scouting the suggestion as far-fetched and offering an English interpretation such as "is found" or "his foul." A handwriting expert was then called, who compared the handwriting with that of the authentic letter of Cathcart's, and was subsequently severely handled by the prosecution. These knotty points being left for the consideration of the noble lords, the defence then called a tedious series of witnesses. The manager of Cox's, Monsieur Toujours of the Credit Lyonnais, who went with much detail into Cathcart's financial affairs, the concierge, Madame Leblanc from the Rue d'Honneur, and the noble lords began to yawn, with the exception of a few of the soap and pickles lords, who suddenly started to make computations in their notebooks and exchanged looks of intelligence, as from one financier to another. Then came Monsieur Briquet, the jeweller, and the girl from the shop, who told their story of the tall, fair foreign lady and the purchase of the green-eyed cat, whereat everybody woke up. After reminding the assembly that this incident took place in February, when Cathcart's fiancée was in Paris, Sir Impey invited the jeweller's assistant to look round the house, and tell them if he saw the foreign lady there. This proved a lengthy business, but the answer was, finally, in the negative.
"I do not want there to be any doubt about this, and with the learned Attorney-General's permission, I am now going to confront this witness with Lady Mary Whimsy."
Lady Mary was accordingly placed before the witness, who replied immediately and positively, "No, this is not the lady. I have never seen this lady in my life. There is the resemblance of height and colour, and the hair bobbed, but there is nothing else at all, not the least in the world. It is not the same type at all. Mademoiselle is a charming English lady, and the man which marries her will be very happy, I am sure. But the other was, A woman to kill, suicide oneself, or send all to the devil for. Believe me, gentlemen, we have the opportunity to see them in my business." There was a profound sensation as this witness took her departure, and Sir Impey scribbled a note and passed it to Mr. Murbles. It contained one word: magnificent. Mr. Murbles scribbled back, "Never said a word to her. Can you beat it?" and leaned back in his seat, smirking like a very neat little grotesque from a Gothic Corbel. The witness who followed was Professor Herbert, a distinguished exponent of international law, who described Cathcart's promising career as a rising young diplomat in Paris before the war. He was followed by a number of officers who testified to the excellent war record of the deceased. Then came a witness who recollected a very uncomfortable dispute on a certain occasion when playing cards with Cathcart, and having subsequently mentioned the matter to Monsieur Thomas Freeborn, the distinguished English engineer. It was Parker's diligence that had unearthed this witness, and he looked across with an undisguised grin at the discomfort of Sir Wigmore Wrenching. When Mr. Glibbery had dealt with all these, the afternoon was well advanced, and the Lord High Steward accordingly asked the Lords if it was their pleasure that the House be adjourned to the next day, at 10:30 of the clock in the forenoon. And the Lords replying aye in a most exemplary chorus, the House was accordingly adjourned. A scurry of black clouds, swift with ragged edges, was driving bleakly westwards as they streamed into Parliament Square, and the seagulls squeaked and wheeled inwards from the river. Charles Parker wrapped his ancient Burberry closely about him as he scrambled on to a bus to get home to Great Ormond Street. It was only one more drop in his cup of discomfort that the conductor greeted him with "outside only," and rang the bell before he could get off again. He climbed to the top and sat there holding his hat on. Mr. Bunter returned sadly to 110A Piccadilly and wandered restlessly about the flat till 7 o'clock, when he came into the sitting-room and switched on the loudspeaker.
"London calling. London calling. Here is the weather forecast. A deep depression is crossing the Atlantic, and a secondary is stationary over the British Isles. Storms of heavy rain and sleet will be prevalent, rising to a gale in the south and southwest."
"Well, you never know. I suppose I'd better light a fire in his bedroom."
Further outlook similar.
Chapter 16. The Second String. Lord Peter peered out through the cold scurry of cloud. The thin struts of steel, incredibly fragile, swung slowly across the gleam and glint far below. The wide country dizzied out and spread like a revolving map, and in front the sleek leather back of his companion humped stubbornly, sheeted with rain. He hoped that Grant was feeling confident. The roar of the engine drowned the occasional shout he threw to his passenger as they lurched from gust to gust. He withdrew his mind from present discomforts and went over that last strange hurried scene. Fragments of conversation spun through his head. "Mademoiselle, I have scoured 2 continents in search of you." "It is urgent?" "Well, be quick, for the big bear may come in and be grumpy, and I do not like histrionics." There had been a lamp on a low table. He remembered the gleam through the haze of short gold hair. She was a tall girl, but slender, looking up at him from the huge black and gold cushions. "Mademoiselle, it's incredible to me that you should ever dine or dance with a person called Van Humperdinck." What had possessed him to say that, when there was so little time and Jerry's affairs were of such importance? "Monsieur Van Humperdinck does not dance. Did you seek me through 2 continents to say that?" "No, I am serious." "Well, sit down." She'd been quite frank about it. "Yes, poor soul, but life was very expensive since the war. I refused several good things, but always to history, and so little money. You see, one must be sensible, for there is one's old age, and it is necessary to be provident." "Assuredly." What was her accent? French? Not quite. Vienna before the war, that capital of incredible follies? Perhaps. "I saw it in the papers, yes, poor boy. Why should anybody have shot him?" "Mademoiselle, it is for that I have come to you. My brother, whom I dearly love, is accused of murder, and he may be hanged." "But for a murder he did not commit." "Well, mon pauvre enfant, mademoiselle, I implore you to be serious. My brother is accused and would be standing his trial." Once her attention had been caught, she had been all sympathy, and her blue eyes had a curious and attractive trick.
a full lower lid that shut them into glimmering slits. "Mademoiselle, I implore you, try to remember what was in his letter to you."
"How can I? I did not read it. It was very long, very tedious, full of histrionics. The thing was finished between us, and I never bother about what cannot be helped. Do you?"
But his real agony at his failure had touched her.
"Listen, then. All is perhaps not lost. It is possible the letter is still somewhere about, or we will ask Adele. She is my maid. She collects letters to blackmail people. Oh, I know, yes. But she is a very good maid. We will look first."
Tossing out letters, trinkets, endless perfumed rubbish from a little gimcrack secretaire, from drawers full of lingerie.
"I'm so untidy. I am Adele's despair."
From bags, hundreds of bags, and at last Adele, thin-lipped and wary-eyed, denying everything, till her mistress suddenly slapped her face in a fury and called her ugly little names in French and German. "It is useless, then," said Lord Peter. "What a pity that Mademoiselle Adele cannot find a thing so valuable to me." The word valuable suggested an idea to Adele. There was Mademoiselle's jewel case which had not been searched. She would fetch it, one never knows. After that, the sudden arrival of Mr. Cornelius Van Humperdinck, very rich and stout and suspicious, and the rewarding of Adele in a tactful, unobtrusive fashion by the elevator shaft. And it was done. Grant shouted, but the words flipped feebly away into the blackness and were lost.
What?
He shouted again, and this time the word juice shot into sound, then fluttered away. But whether the news was good or bad, Lord Peter could not tell. Mr. Murbles was aroused a little after midnight by a thunderous knocking upon his door. Thrusting his head out of the window in some alarm, he saw the porter with his lantern steaming through the rain, and, behind him, a shapeless figure, which for the moment Mr. Murbles could not make out.
"What's the matter? Young lady asking urgently for you, sir."
The shapeless figure looked up, and he caught the spangle of gold hair in the lantern light under the little tight hat.
"Mr. Murbles, please come. Bunter rang me up. There's a woman come to give evidence. Bunter doesn't like to leave her. She's frightened, but he says it's frightfully important. Bunter is always right, you know."
"Did he mention the name?"
"A Mrs. Grimethorpe."
"God bless me. Just a moment, dear young lady. I will let you in."
And indeed, more quickly than might have been expected, Mr. Murbles made his appearance in a Jaeger dressing-gown at the front door. "Come in, my dear. I shall get dressed in a very few minutes. Oh, it was quite right of you to come to me. Oh, I'm very glad you did. What a terrible night. Perkins, would you kindly wake up Mr. Murphy and ask him to oblige me with the use of his telephone?" Mr. Murphy, a noisy Irish barrister with a hearty manner, needed no waking. He was entertaining a party of friends. He was delighted to be of service.
"Is that you, Biggs? Murbles speaking. That alibi.
"Yes?"
It's come along of its own accord."
"My God, you don't say so."
"Can you come round to 110A Piccadilly?"
"Yes, straight away." It was a strange little party gathered round Lord Peter's fire. A white-faced woman, who started at every sound, the men of law with their keen, disciplined faces, Lady Mary, Bunter, the efficient. Mrs. Grimethorpe's story was simple. She had suffered the torments of knowledge ever since Lord Peter had spoken to her. She had seized an hour when her husband was drunk in the Lord of Glory, and had harnessed the horse and driven into Stapley.
"I couldn't keep silence. It's better my man should kill me. I'm unhappy enough. Maybe I couldn't be any worse off in the Lord's hand. I could not let them hang him for a thing he never done. He was kind. I was desperate miserable, that's the truth. I'm hoping his lady won't be hard on him when she knows it all."
No. Excuse me a moment, madam. Sir Impey? Yes, surely. But you see, she has burned her boats pretty well now by coming at all. The great question for us is it worth the risk? After all, we don't know what Whimsy's evidence amounts to. No, but that is why I feel inclined, in spite of risk, to put this evidence in. Well, I am ready to take the risk. We quite appreciate that. It is the risk to our client we have to consider first of all.
Risk? Cried Mary. But surely this clears him.
Ah, but will you swear absolutely to the time when his Grace of Denver arrived at Griders Hole, Mrs. Grimthorpe?
12:15 by the kitchen clock. 'Tis a very good clock.
And he left you at
2:05.
How long would it take a man walking quickly to get back to Riddlesdale Lodge, I wonder?
Well, nigh an hour. It's rough walking, and a steep bank up and down to the beck.
Yes, well, you won't be able to let other counsel upset you on those points, Mrs. Grimthorpe, because they will try to prove that he had time to kill Cathcart either before he started or after he returned. And by admitting that the Duke had something in his life that he wanted to keep secret, we will be applying the very thing the prosecution lack, a motive for murdering anyone who might have found him out. May I ask a question, madam? Has any person any suspicion?
My husband guessed. Sure. He's always known. But he couldn't prove it. That very night.
What night?
Well, the night of the murder. He laid a trap for me, you see. He came back from Stapley in the night, hoping to catch us and do murder. But he drank too much before he started. He spent the night in the ditch. Or it might be Gerald's death you'd be inquiring into, and mine as well as the other.
It gave Mary an odd shock to hear her brother's name spoken like that, by that speaker, and in that company.
She asked suddenly, apropos of nothing, "Isn't Mr. Parker here?"
"No, my dear, this is not a police matter. The best thing we could do, I think, is to put in the evidence, and if necessary arrange for some kind of protection for this lady in the meantime."
"She is coming round with me to mother."
"My dear lady, that would be very unsuitable in the circumstances. I think you hardly grasp—"
"Mother said so. Bunter, call a taxi."
Mr. Murbles waved his hands helplessly, but Sir Impey was rather amused. "It's no good, Murbles. Time and trouble will tame an advanced young woman, but an advanced old woman is uncontrollable by any earthly force." It was from the Dowager's townhouse that Lady Mary rang up Mr. Charles Parker to tell him the news. Chapter 17. The Eloquent Dead. The gale had blown itself out into a wonderful fresh day, with clear spaces of sky, and a high wind rolling boulders of cumulus down the blue slopes of air. The prisoner had been wrangling for an hour with his advisers, when finally they came into court, and even Sir Impey's classical face showed flushed between the wings of his wig. "I'm not going to say anything," said the Duke obstinately. "Rotten thing to do. I suppose I can't prevent you calling her if she insists on coming, which is damn good of her, but it makes me feel no end of a beast."
"We better leave it at that. It makes a good impression, you know. Let him go into the box and behave like a perfect gentleman. They'll like that."
Sir Impey, who had sat through the small hours altering his speech, nodded.
The first witness that day came as something of a surprise. She gave her name and address as Eliza Briggs, known as Madame Brigitte of New Bond Street, and her occupation as beauty specialist and perfumer. She had a large and aristocratic clientele of both sexes, and a branch in Paris. Deceased had been a client of hers in both cities for several years. He had massage and manicure. After the war he'd come to her about slight scars caused by grazing with shrapnel. He was extremely particular about his personal appearance, and if you called that vanity in a man, you might certainly say he was vain. Sir Wigmore Wrinching made no attempt to cross-examine the witness, and the noble lords wondered to one another what it was all about. At this point Sir Impey Biggs leaned forward, and tapping his brief impressively with his forefinger, began. "My lords, so strong is our case that we had not thought it necessary to present an alibi," when an officer of the court rushed up from a little whirlpool of commotion by the door, and excitedly thrust a note into his hand. Sir Impey read, coloured, glanced down the hall, put down his brief and folded his hands over it, and said in a sudden loud voice which penetrated even to the deaf ear of the Duke of Wiltshire, "My lords, I am happy to say that our missing witness is here. I call Lord Peter Wimsey." Every neck was at once craned, and every eye focused on the very grubby and oily figure that came amiably trotting up the long room. Sir Impey Biggs passed the note down to Mr. Murbles, and turning to the witness, who was yawning frightfully in the intervals of grinning at all his acquaintances, determined that he should be sworn. The witness's story was as follows.
I am Peter Dieth Breeden Wimsey, brother of the accused. I live at 110A Piccadilly. In consequence of what I read on that bit of blotting paper which I now identify, I went to Paris to look for a certain lady. The name of the lady is Mademoiselle Simone von der Aar. I found she had left Paris in company of a man called Mr. Van Humperdinck. I followed her, and at length came upon her in New York. I asked her to give me the letter Cathcart wrote on the night of his death. I produced that letter, which Mademoiselle von der Aar's signature is on the corner so that it can be identified, if Wiggy there tries to put it over you. Joyous sensation in which the indignant protests of the prosecuting counsel were drowned. And I'm sorry I've given you such short notice of this, old man, but I only got it the day before yesterday. We came as quick as we could, but we had to come down near Whitehaven with engine trouble, and if we'd come down half a mile sooner, I shouldn't be here at all now. Applause hurriedly checked by the Lord High Steward.
My lords, your lordships are witness that I have never seen this letter in my life before. I have no idea of its contents, yet so positive am I that it cannot but assist my noble client's case. I am willing, nay, eager, to put in this document immediately as it stands, without perusal to stand or fall by its contents. The handwriting must be identified as that of the deceased, interposed the Lord High Steward. The ravening pencils of the reporters tore along the paper. The lean young man who worked for the Daily Trumpet scented a scandal in high life and licked his lips, never knowing what a much bigger one had escaped him by a bare minute or so. Miss Linda Cathcart was recalled to the stand to identify the handwriting. The letter was then handed to the Lord High Steward, who announced, "The letter is in French. We shall have to swear in an interpreter." You will find that those bits of words on the blotting paper, sir, came out of that letter, if you'll excuse me mentioning it. Is this person, Sir Wigmore rose to inquire witheringly, put forward as an expert witness? Yes, you see, this thing has been rather sprung on poor old Wiggy, you might say. Ha! Biggy and Wiggy. Biggy and Wiggy were two pretty men that went into court when the clock... Sir Impey, I must ask you to keep your witness in order. Lord Peter grinned, and a pause ensued while an interpreter was fetched and sworn. Then, at last, the letter was read, amid a breathless silence. Riddlesdale Lodge, Stapley, North East Yorks, 13th of October, 1920... Simone, I have just got your letter. What am I to say? It is useless to entreat or reproach you. You would not understand or even read the letter. Besides, I always knew you must betray me some day. I've suffered a hell of jealousy for the past 8 years. I know perfectly well you never meant to hurt me. It was just your utter lightness and carelessness, and your attractive way of being dishonest, which was so adorable. But I knew everything, yet loved you all the same. No, my dear, I never had any illusions. You remember our first meeting that night at the casino. You were 17, heart-breakingly lovely. You came to me the very next day. You told me very prettily that you loved me, and that I was the first. My poor little girl. That wasn't true. I expect when you were alone you laughed to think how easily I was taken in. But there was nothing to laugh at. From our very first kiss I foresaw this moment. I'm afraid I am weak enough, though, to want to tell you just what you have done for me. You may be sorry, but no, if you could regret anything, you wouldn't be Simone any longer. 8 years ago, before the war, I was rich. Not so rich as your new American, but rich enough to give you what you wanted. You didn't want quite so much before the war, Simone. Who taught you to be so extravagant while I was away? I think it was very nice of me never to ask that. Well, most of my money was in Russian and German securities. More than 3/4 of it went west. The remainder in France went down considerably in value. I had my captain's pay, of course, but that did not amount to much. Even before the end of the war, you'd managed to get through all my savings. Of course, I was a fool. A young man whose income has been reduced by 3/4 can't afford an expensive mistress. He ought either to dismiss the lady or to demand a little self-sacrifice.
but I didn't dare demand anything. Suppose I had come to you one day and said, 'Simone, I've lost my money.' What would you have done? What would you have said?" "Well, what do you think I did do? I don't suppose you've ever thought about it at all. You didn't care I was chucking away my money, and my honour and my happiness to keep you. I gambled desperately. I did worse. I cheated at cards. I can see you shrug your shoulders and say, 'Good for you,' but it's a rotten thing to do. It's a rotter's game. If anybody had found out, they'd have cashiered me. Besides, it couldn't go on forever. There was one row in Paris, for they couldn't prove anything. So when I got engaged to the English girl I told you about, the Duke's daughter, I actually brought myself to consider keeping my mistress on my wife's money. I'd have done it, and I'd do it again, to get you back. But now you've chucked me. This American is colossally rich. For a long time you've been dinning into my ears that the flat is too small, and you're bored to death. Your good friend can offer you cars, diamonds, Aladdin's palace, the moon. I admit my love and honour look pretty small by comparison to that. Ah, well, the Duke is most obligingly stupid. He leaves his revolver about in his desk drawer. Besides, he's just been in to ask about the cart shopping story. So you see the game is up. I don't blame you. I suppose they'll put my suicide down to fear of exposure. All the better. I don't want my love affairs in the Sunday press. Goodbye, my dear. Oh, Simone. My darling, my darling. Goodbye. Be happy with your new lover. Never mind me. What does it all matter? By God, how I loved you. How I shall love you in spite of myself. But it's all done with. You'll never break my heart again. I am mad. Mad with misery. Goodbye. Chapter 18. The Speech for the Defence. After the reading of Cathcart's letter, even the appearance of a prisoner in the witness box came as an anticlimax. In the face of the Attorney General's cross-examination, he maintained stoutly that he'd wandered on the moor for several hours without meeting anybody, though he was forced to admit that he had gone downstairs at 11:30, and not 2:30, as he had stated at the inquest. Sir Wigmore Wrinching made a great point of this, and in a spirited endeavour to suggest that Cathcart was blackmailing Denver, pressed his question so hard that Sir Impey Biggs, Mr. Murbles, Lady Mary, and Bunter had a nervous feeling that learned counsel's eyes were boring through the walls to the other side of the room, where, apart from the other witnesses, Mrs. Grimethorpe sat waiting. After lunch, Sir Impey Biggs rose to make his plea for the defence. "My lords, your lordships have now heard, and I, who have watched and pleaded here for these 3 anxious days, know with what eager interest and with what ready sympathy you have heard. The evidence brought by my noble client to defend him against this dreadful charge of murder, you have listened to, as it were, from his narrow grave. The dead man has lifted his voice to tell you the story of that fatal night of the 13th of October, and I feel sure you can have no doubt in your hearts that that story is the true one. As your lordships know, I was myself totally ignorant of the contents of that letter until I heard it read in court just now, and, by the profound impression it made upon my own mind, I can judge how tremendously and how painfully it must have affected your lordships. In my long experience at the criminal bar, I think I have never met with a history more melancholy than that of the unhappy young man whom a fatal passion, for here indeed we may use that well-worn expression in all the fullness of its significance, whom a truly fatal passion, thus urged into deep, deep degradation, finally brought him to the violent death by his own hand. The noble peer at the bar has been indicted before your lordships of the murder of this young man. That he is wholly innocent of the charge must, in the light of what we have heard, be so plain to your lordships that any words from me might seem altogether superfluous. In the majority of cases of this kind the evidence is confused and contradictory. Here, however, the course of events is so clear, so coherent, that had we ourselves been present to see the drama unroll before us, as before the all-seeing eye of God, we could hardly have a more vivid or more accurate vision of that night's adventures.
Indeed, had the death of Dennis Cathcart been the sole event of the night, I will venture to say that the truth could never have been one single moment in doubt. Since, however, by a series of unheard-of coincidences, the threads of Dennis Cathcart's story became so entangled with others, I will venture to tell once again from the beginning, lest in the confusion of so great a cloud of witness any point should still remain obscure.
You shall hear it from a person who knows it best. I call upon the witness, Lord Peter Wimsey.
Let me then go back to the beginning. You have heard how Dennis Cathcart was born, of mixed parentage, from the union of a young and lovely Southern girl with an Englishman 20 years older than herself. Imperious, passionate, and cynical. Till the age of 18 he lives on the continent with his parents, travelling from place to place, seeing more of the world even than the average young Frenchman of his age.
He falls in love with a young woman of that exquisite, irresistible charm and beauty for which the Austrian capital is world famous. He is enthralled, body and soul, as utterly as any chevalier. Life has expanded for Dennis Cathcart. Rich, ambitious, possessed of a beautiful and complacent mistress, the world is open before him. Then, my lords, across this promising career there falls the thunderbolt of the Great War. Ruthlessly smashing through his safeguards, overthrowing the edifice of his ambition, destroying and devastating here as everywhere all that made life beautiful and desirable. Of his great fortune, all of which had been invested in Russian and German securities, literally nothing is left to him. What, you say, did that matter to a young man so well equipped, with such excellent connections, with so many favourable openings ready to his hand? He needed only to wait quietly for a few years to reconstruct much of what he had lost. Alas, my lords, he could not afford to wait. He stood in peril of losing something dearer to him than fortune or ambition. He needed money in quantity and at once. My lords, in that pathetic letter which we have heard, nothing more touching and terrible is in that confession. I knew you could not be but unfaithful to me. All through that time of seeming happiness, he knew, none better, that his house was built on sand. I was never deceived by you, he says. From their earliest acquaintance she had lied to him, and he knew it, and that knowledge was yet powerless to loosen the bonds of fatal fascination. If any of you, my lords, have known the power of love exercised in the irrepressible, I may say this predestined manner, let your experience interpret the situation to you better than any poor words of mine can do. My lords, Dennis Cathcart is dead. It is not our place to condemn him, but only to understand and pity him. My lords, I need not put before you in detail the shocking shifts to which this soldier and gentleman unhappily condescended. You have heard it all. You know how he gambled, at first honestly, then dishonestly. You know from whence he derived these large sums of money which came at irregular intervals, mysteriously and in cash, to bolster up a bank account always perilously on the verge of depletion. We need not, my lords, judge too harshly of the woman, for according to her own lights she did not treat him unfairly. She had her interests to consider. While he could pay for her, she could give him beauty and passion and good humour and a moderate faithfulness. When he could pay no longer, she would find it only reasonable to take another position. This Cathcart understood. Money he must have, by hook or by crook, and so, by inevitable descent, he found himself reduced to the final deep of dishonour. It is at this point, my lords, that Dennis Cathcart and his miserable fortunes came into the life of my noble client and of his sister. From this point begin all those complications which led to the tragedy of October 14th, and which we are met in this solemn and historic assembly to unravel. About 18 months ago, Cathcart, desperately searching for a secure source of income, met the Duke of Denver, whose father had been a friend of Cathcart's father many years before. The acquaintance prospered, and Cathcart was introduced to Lady Mary Wimsey. At that time, as she has frequently told us, was at a loose end, fed up and distressed by the dismal of her fiancé, Mr. Goyles. Lady Mary felt the need of an establishment of her own, and accepted Dennis Cathcart with the proviso that she should be considered a free agent, living her own life in her own way with a minimum of interference. So matters go on until October of this year. Cathcart is now obliged to pass a good deal of his time in England with his fiancée, leaving Simone von der Aa unregarded in the Avenue Kléber. The only drawback was that Lady Mary, with a natural reluctance to commit herself to the hands of a man she could not really love, had so far avoided fixing a definite date for the wedding. Money is shorter than it used to be, and the cost of robes and millinery, amusements, and so forth, is not diminished. Meanwhile, Mr. Cornelius Van Humperdinck, the American millionaire, had seen Simone at the races, and at the opera, and in Dennis Cathcart's flats. But Lady Mary is becoming more and more uneasy about this engagement, and at this critical moment Mr. Goyles suddenly sees the prospect of a position modest but assured, which will enable him to maintain a wife. Lady Mary makes her choice. She consents to elope with Mr. Goyles, and by an extraordinary fatality, the day and hour selected are 3 a.m. on the morning of October the 14th. At about 9:30 on the night of Wednesday, October the 13th, the party at Riddlesdale Lodge are just separating to go to bed. The Duke of Denver is in the gun-room, the other men in the billiard-room, the ladies already retired, when the manservant Fleming comes up from the village with the evening post. To the Duke of Denver he brought a letter with news of a startling and unpleasant kind. To Dennis Cathcart he brought another letter, one which we shall never see, but whose contents is easy enough to guess. You have heard the evidence of Mr. Arbuthnot, but before reading this letter, Cathcart had gone upstairs gay and hopeful, mentioning that he hoped soon to get a date fixed for the wedding. At a little after 10, when the Duke of Denver went to see him, there was a great change. Before his Grace could broach the matter in hand, Cathcart spoke rudely and harshly, appearing to be all on edge, and entreating to be left alone. "Is it very difficult, my lords, in the face of what we have heard today, in the face of the knowledge that Mademoiselle von der Aa crossed to New York on the Belgania on October the 15th, to guess what news had reached Dennis Cathcart in that interval, to change his whole outlook upon life? At this unhappy moment, when Cathcart is brought face to face with the stupefying knowledge that his mistress has left him, comes the Duke of Denver with a frightful accusation. He taxes Cathcart upon the vile truth that this man, who has eaten his bread and sheltered under his roof, and who is about to marry his sister, is nothing more or less than a card-sharper. And when Cathcart refuses to deny the charge, when he most insolently, as it seems, declares that he is no longer willing to wed the noble lady to whom he is affianced, is it surprising that the Duke should turn upon the impostor and forbid him ever to touch or speak to Lady Mary Wimsey again? I say, my lords, that no man with a spark of honourable feeling could have done otherwise. And when Cathcart rushes madly out into the storm, he calls after him to return, even instructs the footman to leave open the conservatory door for Cathcart's convenience. It is true he called Cathcart a dirty scoundrel, and told him he should have been kicked out of his regiment, but he was justified, and while the words he shouted from the window, "Come back, you fool," or even, according to one witness, "You bloody fool," have almost an affectionate ring in them. Now I will direct your lordships to the extreme weakness of the case. It has been suggested that the cause of the quarrel between them was not that mentioned by the Duke of Denver in his evidence, but something even more closely personal to themselves. On this contention not a jot or tittle, not the slightest shadow of evidence has ever been put forward, except indeed that of the extraordinary witness Robinson, who appears to bear a grudge against his whole acquaintance, and who have magnified some trifling allusion into a matter of vast importance. Your lordships have seen this person's demeanour in the box, and will judge for yourselves how much weight is to be attached to those observations. While we, on our side, have been able to show that the alleged cause of complaint was perfectly well founded in fact. So Cathcart rushes out into the garden in the pelting rain and paces heedlessly about, envisaging a future stricken at once suddenly barren of love, wealth, and honour. Meanwhile, a passage door opens, and a stealthy foot creeps down the stair. We know now whose it is. Mrs. Pettigrew Robinson has not mistaken the creak of the door. It is the Duke of Denver. That is admitted, but from this point we join issue with my learned friend for the prosecution. It is suggested that the Duke, on thinking matters over, determines Cathcart is a danger to society and better dead, or that his insult to the Denver family can only be washed out in blood. and we are invited to believe that the Duke creeps downstairs, fetches his revolver from the study table, and prowls out into the night to find Cathcart and make away with him in cold blood. My lords, is it necessary for me to point out the inherent absurdity of the suggestion? What conceivable reason could the Duke of Denver have for killing, in this cold-blooded manner, a man of whom a single word has rid him already and forever? It has been suggested to you that the injury had grown greater in the Duke's mind by brooding. It must have assumed gigantic proportions then. Of that suggestion, my lord, I can only say that a more flimsy pretext for fixing an impulse to murder upon the shoulders of an innocent man was never devised even by the ingenuity of an advocate. I will not waste my time or insult you by arguing about it. Again it has been suggested that the cause of the quarrel was not what it appeared, and the Duke had reason to fear some disastrous action on Cathcart's part. On this contention I think we've already disposed. This is an assumption constructed in vacuo, to meet a set of circumstances which my learned friend is at a loss to explain, not with the known facts. The very number and variety of motives suggested by the prosecution is proof that they are aware of the weakness of their own case. Frantically they cast about for some sort of explanation to give colour to this unreasonable indictment. And here I will direct your lordship's attention to the very important evidence of Inspector Parker in the matter of the study window. He has told you it was forced from outside by the latch being slipped back with a knife. If it was the Duke of Denver who was in his study at 11:30, what need had he to force the window? He was already inside the house. When in addition we find that Cathcart had in his pocket a knife, and that there are scratches upon the blade, such as might come from forcing back a metal catch, it surely becomes evident that not the Duke but Cathcart forced himself into the window and crept in for a pistol, not knowing the conservatory door had been left open for him. But there is no need to labour this point. We know that Captain Cathcart was in the study at that time, for we have seen in evidence the sheet of blotting paper on which he blotted his letter to Simone von der Aa. The Duke of Denver has told us that he saw the revolver in his drawer a short time before the fatal 13th, when he and Cathcart were together. At this point the Lord High Steward interrupted. "One moment. This is not quite as I have it in my notes. I shall read what I have. I was hunting for an old photograph of Mary to give Cathcart, and that was how I came across it. There is nothing about Cathcart being there." "If your lordship will read the next sentence."
"Certainly. The next sentence is, to whom did you make that observation? Answer, I really don't know, but I distinctly remember saying it."
"I am obliged, your lordship. When the noble peer made that remark, he was looking out some photographs to give Captain Cathcart. I think we may reasonably infer that the remark was made to the deceased."
"Well, my lords, your lordships will of course use your own judgment as to the value of that suggestion."
"If your lordships can accept that Dennis Cathcart may have known of the existence of a revolver, it is immaterial at what the exact moment he saw it. As you have heard, the table drawer was always left with a key in it. He might have seen it himself at any time, when searching for an envelope or sealing wax, or what not. In any case, I contend that the movements heard by Colonel and Mrs. Marchbanks on Wednesday night were those of Dennis Cathcart, while he was writing his farewell letter, perhaps with a pistol before him on the table, yes. And at that very moment the Duke of Denver slipped down the stairs and out through a conservatory door. Here is the incredible part of the affair. Again and again we find two series of events wholly unconnected between themselves, converging upon the same point of time, and causing endless confusion. May we return to the witness? A good point. May we? Oh, of course.
Thanks awfully. I used the word incredible, not because any coincidence is incredible, for we see more remarkable examples every day of our lives, more than any writer of fiction would dare invent, but merely in order to take it out of the mouth of the learned Attorney General, who is preparing, I suggest, to make it return boomerang fashion against me. My lords, this is the first use of these incredible, and I am not afraid of a word, coincidences. At 11:30 the Duke goes downstairs, and Cathcart enters the study.
The learned Attorney-General, in his cross-examination, very justifiably, made what capital he could out of a discrepancy between the witness's statement at the inquest, which was that he did not leave the house till 2:30, and his present statement that he left it at 11:30. My lords, whatever interpretation you like to place upon the motives of the noble Duke, I may remind you once more that at that time, when that first statement was made, everybody suggested that the shot had been fired at 3 o'clock, and that the misstatement was then useless for the purposes of establishing an alibi.
The defence then went on to cover the Duke's inability to establish an alibi for the hours from 11:30 to 3 a.m. Sir Impey informed them that if the Duke in truth is saying he walked all that time upon the moors without meeting anyone, what alibi could he be expected to establish? He was not, after all, bound to supply a motive for all his minor actions during the 24 hours. No rebutting evidence had been brought to discredit his story, and it was perfectly reasonable that, unable to sleep after the scene with Cathcart, he should go for a walk to calm himself down.
Meanwhile, Cathcart has finished his letter and tossed it into the post-bag. There's nothing more ironical in the whole of his case than that letter. While the body of a murdered man lay stark upon the threshold, and detectives and doctors searched everywhere for clues, the normal routine of an ordinary English household went, unquestioned, on. That letter, which contained the whole story, lay undisturbed in the post-bag till it was taken away and put in the post as a matter of course, to be fetched back again at enormous cost, delay, and risk of life, 2 months later, in vindication of the great English motto, business as usual. Upstairs, Lady Mary Wimsey was packing her suitcase and writing a farewell letter to her people. At length Cathcart signs his name. He takes up the revolver and hurries out into the shrubbery. Still he paces up and down, with what thoughts, God knows, reviewing the past, no doubt, racked with vain remorse, most of all, bitter against the woman who has ruined him. He bethinks him of a little love-token, the platinum and diamond cat which his mistress gave him for good luck. At any rate, he will not die with that pressing upon his heart. With a furious gesture he hurls it as far from him as he can, and then puts the pistol to his head. But something arrests him. Not that! Not that! He sees in fancy his own hideously disfigured corpse, the shattered jaw, the burst eyeball, blood and brains horribly splashed about. No, let the bullet go cleanly to the heart. Not even in death can he bear the thought of looking so. He places the revolver against his breast and draws the trigger. With a little moan he drops to the sodden ground. The weapon falls from his hand. His fingers scrabble a little at his breast. The gamekeeper, who heard the shot, is puzzled that poachers should come so close. Why are they not in the moors? He thinks of the hares in the plantation. He takes his lantern and searches in the thick drizzle. Nothing, only soggy grass and dripping trees. He is human and concludes his ears have deceived him, and he returns to his warm bed. Midnight passes. 1 o'clock passes. The rain is less heavy now. Look, in the shrubbery. What was that? A movement. The shot man is moving, groaning a little, crawling to his feet. Chilled to the bone, weak from loss of blood, shaking with the fever of his wound, he but dimly remembers his purpose. His groping hands go to the wound in his breast. He pulls out a handkerchief and presses it upon the place. He drags himself up, slipping and stumbling. The handkerchief slides to the ground and lies there beside the revolver, among the fallen leaves. Something in his aching brain tells him to crawl back to the house. He is sick, in pain, hot and cold by turns, and horribly thirsty. There someone will take him in and be kind to him, give him things to drink. So swaying and starting, now falling on hands and knees, now reeling to and fro, he makes that terrible nightmare journey to the house. Now he walks, now he crawls, dragging his heavy limbs after him. At last the conservatory door. Here there will be help. and water for his fever in the trough by the well. Oh, he crawls up to it on hands and knees and strains to lift himself. It is growing very difficult to breathe. A heavy weight seems to be bursting his chest. He lifts himself. A frightful hiccuping cough catches him. The blood rushes from his mouth. He drops down. It is now indeed all over. 1 more hour passes. 3 o'clock. The hour of rendezvous draws on. Eagerly the young lover leaps the wall and comes hurrying through a shrubbery to greet his bride-to-be. It is cold and wet, but his happiness gives him no time to think of his surroundings. He passes through without a thought. He reaches the conservatory door, through which in a few moments love and happiness will come to him. And in that moment he stumbles across the dead body of a man. Fear possesses him. He hears a distant footstep. With but one idea, escape from this horror of horrors, he dashes back into the shrubbery. Just as fatigued, perhaps, but with a mind soothed by his little expedition, the Duke of Denver comes briskly up the path to meet the eager bride over the body of her betrothed. My lords, the rest is clear. Lady Mary Wimsey, forced by a horrible appearance of things into suspecting her lover a murderer, undertook with what courage every man amongst you will realize, to conceal that George Goyles was ever upon the scene. Of this ill-considered action of hers came much mystery and perplexity. Yet, my lords, while chivalry holds its own, not one amongst us will breathe one word of blame against that gallant lady. As the old song says, God send each man at his end such hawks, such hounds, and such a friend. I think, my lords, that there is nothing more for me to say. To you I leave the solemn and joyful task of freeing the noble peer, your companion, from this unjust charge. You are but human, my lords, and some among you will have grumbled on assuming these medieval splendours of scarlet and ermine, so fallen to the taste and habit of a utilitarian age. You well know 'tis not the balm, the sceptre and the ball, the sword, the mace, the crown imperial, the intertissued robe of gold and pearl, the farsaid title, nor the tide of pomp, that beats upon the high shores of the world, that can add any dignity to noble blood. And yet, to have beheld day after day the head of one of the oldest and noble houses in England standing here, cut off from your fellowship, stripped of his historic honours, robed only in the justice of his cause, this cannot have failed to move your pity and indignation. My lords, it is your happy privilege to restore to his Grace the Duke of Denver these traditional symbols of his exalted rank. When the clerk of the house shall address you to the several and solemn question, do you find Gerald, Duke of Denver, Viscount St. George, guilty or not guilty of the dreadful crime of murder? Every one of you may, with a confidence unmarred by any shadow of doubt, lay his hand upon his heart and say, Not guilty, upon my honour. Chapter 19. Who Goes Home? While the Attorney General was engaged in the ungrateful task of trying to obscure what was not only plain, but agreeable to everybody's feelings, Lord Peter hauled Parker off to a Lyons over the way, and listened, over an enormous dish of eggs and bacon, to a brief account of Mrs. Grimethorpe's dash to town, and a long one of Lady Mary's cross-examination. "What are you grinning about?" "Oh, just natural imbecility. I say, poor old Cathcart. She was a girl." "Oh, for a matter of fact, I suppose she still is. I mean, I don't know why I should talk as though she died the moment I took my eyes off her." "Horribly self-centred you are." "Well, I know. I always was from a child. What worries me is that I seem to be getting so susceptible. When Barbara turned me down, "You're cured of that," said his friend brutally. "As a matter of fact, I've noticed that for some time." "Ah, yes. I value your candour, Charles. I wish you hadn't such an unkind way of putting things. Besides, I say, are they coming out?" The crowd in Parliament Square was beginning to stir and spread. Sparse streams of people began to drift across the street. A splash of scarlet appeared amongst the grey stone of St. Stephen's. The Merble's clerk dashed suddenly in at the door. "It's all right, my lord. Acquitted, unanimously. And will you please come across, my lord?" They ran out. The sight of Lord Peter, some excited bystanders raised a cheer. A great wind tore suddenly through the square, bellying out the scarlet robes of the emerging peers. Lord Peter was handled from one to the other till he reached the centre of the group. "Excuse me, your grace." It was Bunter. Bunter, miraculously, with his arms full of scarlet, and ermine, enveloping the shameful blue serge suit which had been a badge of disgrace. "Allow me to offer my respectful congratulations, your grace." "Bunter!" cried Lord Peter. "Great God, the man's gone mad. Damn you, man, take that thing away," he added, plunging at a tall photographer in a made-up tie. "Too late, my lord." "Damn it." "Peter," said the Duke. "There you are. Thanks, old man. Yeah, quite all right." They pushed their way through the surging mob to the cars. The two duchesses got in, and the Duke was following, when a bullet crashed through the glass of the window, missing Denver's head by an inch, and ricocheting from a windscreen among the crowd. A rush and a yell. A big bearded man struggled for a moment with 3 constables. Then came a succession of wild shots, and a fierce rush, the crowd parting, then closing in. They were like hounds on the fox, streaming past the Houses of Parliament, heading for Westminster Bridge. "He's shot a woman! He's under that bus! No, he isn't! Hey, murder! Stop him!" Shrill screams and yells, police whistles blowing, constables darting from every corner, swooping down, taxis running. The driver of a taxi, spinning across the bridge, saw the fierce face just ahead of his bonnet and jammed on his brakes as the madman's fingers closed for the last time on the trigger. Shot and tyre exploded almost simultaneously. The taxi slewed giddily over to the right, scooping the fugitive with it, and crashed horribly into a tram standing vacant on the embankment dead end. "I couldn't help it. He fired at me. Oh, God, I couldn't help it." "Yeah, constable, I know this man. He has an unfortunate grudge against my brother, in connection with a poaching matter up in Yorkshire. Tell the coroner to come to me for the information." "Very good, my lord." "Don't photograph that." "I wasn't going to photograph the body, my lord. Our readers don't want to see that. Just the scene of the crash and the ambulanceman. Bright, newsy pictures, you know. Nothing gruesome." With an explanatory jerk of the head at the great dark splotches in the roadway, he added, "They don't pay." There was not, after all, the slightest trouble in the matter of Mrs. Grimethorpe. Seldom, perhaps, has a ducal escapade resolved itself with so little embarrassment. His Grace, indeed, who was nothing if not a gentleman, braced himself gallantly for a regretful and sentimental interview. In all his rather stupid affairs, he had never run away from a scene, or countered a storm of sobs with the maddening, "Well, I'd better be going now," which has led to so many despairs, and occasionally to cold shot. But on this occasion the whole business fell flat, for the lady was not interested. "I'm free now. I'm going back to my own people in Cornwall. I don't want anything, not now he's dead." The Duke's dutiful caress was a most uninteresting failure. Lord Peter saw her home to a respectable little hotel in Bloomsbury. She liked the taxi and the large glittering shops and the sky signs. They stopped at Piccadilly Circus to see the Bonzo dog smoke his gasper, and the Nestle's baby consume his bottle of milk. She was amazed to find that the prices of the things in Swan and Edgar's window were, if anything, more reasonable than those current in Stapley. "I would like one of those blue scarves, but I'm thinking 'twouldn't be very fitting, would it, with me a widow?" "Well, you could buy it now and wear it later on. In Cornwall, you know." "Yes. And could I buy my blacks here? Just a dress and a hat and a coat, maybe?" "I should think it would be a very good idea." "Now?" "Well, why not?" "I've got money. I took it from his desk. It is mine now, I suppose. Not that I'd wish to be beholden to him, but I don't look at it that way." "I shouldn't think twice about it if I were you." She walked before him into the shop, her own woman at last. In the early hours of the morning, Inspector Sugg, who happened to be passing Parliament Square, came upon a taxi-man apparently addressing a heated expostulation to the statue of Lord Palmerston. Indignant at this senseless proceeding, Mr. Sugg advanced, and then observed that the statesman was sharing his pedestal with a gentleman in evening dress, who clung precariously with one hand, while the other held an empty champagne bottle to his eye, and surveyed the surrounding streets.
"Hey!" said the policeman. "What are you doing there? Come off it!"
"Hello!"
said the gentleman, losing his balance quite suddenly and coming down in a jumbled manner.
"Have you seen my friend? Very odd thing. Damned odd. When in doubt, ask a policeman. What? Ah, he's a friend of mine, you see. He's a very dignified sort of man. An opera hat, yes. Freddie, yes. Good old Freddie. Always answering the name just like jolly old bloodhound Freddie. Ha!"
He got to his feet and stood beaming at the officer. "Why, if it ain't his lordship," said Inspector Sugg, who had met Lord Peter in other circumstances.
You'd better be getting home, my lord. Night air's chilly, ain't it? You'll catch a cold or something like that. Here's your taxi, so you just jump in now."
"Ah, no. No, I couldn't do that, you see, not that, my friend. My friend's good old Freddie. You'll never desert a friend, dear old Sugg. Wouldn't desert Freddie."
He attempted an attitude with one foot poised on the step of a taxi, but miscalculating his distance, stepped heavily into the gutter, thus entering the vehicle unexpectedly, head first. Mr. Sugg tried to tuck his legs in and shut him up, but his lordship thwarted this movement with unlooked-for agility, and sat firmly on the step. "This is not my taxi. This is Freddie's taxi. It's not right to run away with a friend's taxi. It'd be very odd. I just went around the corner to fetch Freddie's taxi, and Freddie was just round the corner to fetch my taxi, you see. It's a fiendish, friendly taxi friendship. It's a beautiful thing. Don't you think so, Sugg? You can't leave a friend. Besides, there's dear old Parker." "Mr. Parker? Where?"
"Hush, don't wake him. Poor baby's good show.
Following his lordship's gaze, the horrified Sugg observed his official superior cosily tucked up on the far side of Palmerston and smiling a happy smile in his sleep. With an exclamation of alarm, he bent over and shook the sleeper.
"Well, that's not very kind. Disturbing a poor old fellow, hard-working policeman. Never get up till the alarm goes. Why hasn't the alarm gone off, Sugg?"
He pointed a wavering finger at Big Ben.
"They've forgotten to wind it up. Disgraceful. I'll write to I'll write to the papers about it."
Mr. Sugg wasted no words, but picked up the slumbering Parker and hoisted him into the taxi.
"You'll never desert,"
began Lord Peter, resisting all efforts to dislodge him from the step, when a second taxi, advancing from Whitehall, drew up, with the Honourable Freddie Arbuthnot cheering loudly at the window.
"It's jolly old Sugg. Hello, Sugg. Are we all going home together?"
"Well, that's my taxi." The two whirled together for a moment. Then the Honourable Freddie was flung into Sugg's arms, while his lordship, with a satisfied air, cried "Home!" to the new taxi-man, and instantly fell asleep in a corner of the vehicle. Mr. Sugg scratched his head, gave Lord Peter's address, and watched the cab drive off. Then, supporting the Honourable Freddie on his ample bosom, he directed the other man to convey Mr. Parker to 12A Great Ormond Street.
"Take me home, too," cried the Honourable Freddie, bursting into tears. "You're going to leave me?"
"Yes, you leave it to me, sir." Sugg glanced over his shoulder at St. Stephen's, whence a group of Commons were just issuing from an all-night sitting. "Oh, I don't know. Lord Peter, Visson, and Mr. Parker and all. Oh, dear. Thank the good God above that there weren't no witnesses."